This is Kurt Smith from Working Excellence. I'm talking to Ryan Jones. We're going to commiserate, share our feelings and our experiences around what we're seeing in the marketplace with engineering, with agentic AI, what that general marketplace is like, what companies are doing right now in that marketplace, some of our experiences with these sorts of projects, and some of the tools and accelerators and some thoughts on that as well. So, Ryan, how are you doing today?
Yeah, doing good. Yeah, definitely doing good. Can't complain.
Great.
So
So
happy to be here.
let's jump into the marketplace that's out there. I think the notion of the old offshoring of and setting up technology-based projects, forget AI, just great setting up technology projects and leveraging the offshore model is a bit passé at this point, or it's a 2010-ish kind of thing. And where we are today is a lot more skilled people and a lot more strategic in the way that they come in and they help their clients and get things done more quickly. So let's talk a little bit about that experience and what you're seeing as your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So, initially when I started the company Serverless Guru, we were looking at a skill gap in the market. I had started at Nike myself, and I was surrounded by all these incredible individuals. They were able to put anybody into imposter syndrome on a daily basis. Some of them had released number one applications on the iOS App Store and so on. And here I am trying to figure out where do I fit and where do I add value. And I noticed that they didn't understand one piece, which was cloud development and cloud architecture to the degree that they could do Java development and other things. And so from there, I started making that sort of my niche and gradually built a business around it. And then started realizing through this process, if you hire specialists in one single focus area, you end up saving so much downstream time. And as a result of that, we've grown from initially one person to now more than 150 globally, and all based around the idea of hire the best to get the best outcomes. And if you do that consistently, then you don't have to stay up late at night stressing about whether or not the implementation is actually moving forward, whether or not it's going to fall down in production once you guys release. And you can just have confidence that the thing that you're trying to actually get done is going to get done right the first time. And that's, yeah.
So getting more, the average cost per resource might be more expensive, but the output and the quality and the lack of rework are the offsetting factors. Getting more done more quickly with teams, as we sometimes have talked about, no look passes, so to speak, within those teams, highly enmeshed teams that understand what their responsibilities are in that team and get work done more quickly. I think is
Exactly.
the mantra of
Yeah.
right now what we're seeing in the marketplace.
Yeah. And just to add to that, I mean, a lot of times I think the calculations that people run don't actually accurately reflect what is really happening. And a lot of it is, you know, we like to use the phrase, which is a little bit, I guess, a little bit not insulting, but it sparks, it sparks something, right? And it's spreadsheet leadership. And the idea being that if you're only focused on cells on a spreadsheet and you're looking at inputs, and then you have this idea that by lowering these inputs down, you can get the same output at the end, it's just not how real life works. And so the ingredients that you put into the soup is what ends up becoming the soup later. And so you put bad ingredients, you get a bad result, you get a sour soup. You put good ingredients, you have a Michelin star rated soup. And what does that enable? As you said, rework. But there's also multiple factors to calculations that I think are being done improperly, which is what about your time? What about the time that you could have been spending on other projects, moving those things forward? And what are you ultimately doing all this for? Likely to generate more revenue. And how do you do that? Through releasing new features, fixing things inside of your existing applications. The more time that you spend on those areas, the more impact that has on your downstream customers. And ultimately, that leads to more revenue, more products delivered, happier customers, and I think ultimately happier stakeholders. And so, yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah, that's what I, I totally agree. I think also, before we leave the marketplace, I do want to talk about two different types of buckets of firms and some of the things that how AI is going to affect them. The one side is the big offshore firms. They're doing lot of times application support and maintenance, and customers are going to start to get savvy to the idea that AI can cut that cost of production of support of that production platform significantly, and they're going to go back for a rebate. And those offshore firms are probably going to try to say, well, we can do more with the same team. And the customers are going to say, that's all well and good, but I'd rather take it in the form of a discount. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have the big consultancies, the Accentures and the Deloittes of the world. We just had the McKinsey data breach. So I think they're also going to be struggle to charge the kinds of rates that they charge at the upper end when a lot more of it can be answered through AI, or at least started with AI. So lots of pressure, I think, in the what I would call the upper end of the market, the sometimes called the white shoe consulting side is going to have pressure. And then the other end of the spectrum is the less expensive per head volume kind of offshore providers. And I think they're also going to, what I'm seeing is they're going to have pressure on them as well to deliver more savings. And so that means smaller revenues, and they're going to have to make it up somewhere else, or they're going to have to let people go. So my people in the marketplace are saying that especially in the offshore space, that shoe hasn't dropped yet, and that might be a year or a year and a half into the future. So your thoughts on that and what you're seeing?
Yeah. Yeah. So I definitely, just to start on the first point that you just talked about, which is the sort of lower end side of things. I think with AI, what we're seeing from our side is it allows you to move a lot faster, but oftentimes you don't want to be moving in that direction. And so going in the wrong direction 5 times faster is actually not a good thing. It's not a positive at all. It's actually a net negative. And there were some studies that were done showing that if you take senior developers leveraging AI, in certain cases, they actually spent 91% more time on code reviews. And ultimately, if you take the entirety of the entire cycle of leveraging AI plus a senior developer, it ended up reducing productivity by 19%. And so it's counterintuitive why that would be the case. But I think it's because the maturity cycle that we're in right now it's evolving on a daily basis, weekly basis. And what that really translates to is if you don't have a set standards and practices that are very heavily defined and have been battle tested, then you end up running into situations where everyone's sort of a chicken with their head cut off, running in different directions, trying different things. And then you have the hype cycle of the market, you have the FOMO side of the market, all interweaving together. And, there's things we've seen, which is you have the people 10,000 feet up that maybe don't see that low level end, and they can't really understand what's real and what's not real. And all of it seems a little bit like magic. And so distilling that magic and actually talking about what those core pieces are, how they work, and defining those very clearly, putting up guardrails, good security, and creating a practice that's repeatable by many people. That's not quote unquote sexy, I would say. People don't really like that conversation because it sort of takes the genie and kind of puts it a little bit back in the bottle, but just enough to have the actual net benefit of it. And I think as time goes on, and as we see more of these data leaks happen, as we see things like Deloitte delivering a report where all the references are actually AI generated and not usable, more people are going to become aware that, hey, maybe I need to spend even more time double checking this. And if that's the case, am I actually getting that benefit that I thought I was? And have we replaced the human, or have we just pushed them upstream? And are we taking units of productivity and actually turning them into the bottleneck around what we would say garbage collection, keeping the garbage from flowing out, right? So you take your top performing developers or engineers or individuals across each different department inside of a business, you move them to the review step. And if the thing that's being generated is more like a junior level outcome, then all the senior person is doing is basically saying, no, don't use that, don't use this. And in some cases, it ends up creating more work and more time to deliver potentially the same outcome. And I think it's healthy. I think that companies need to go through this process of trial and error. I would say for anyone listening, the best way to figure out what's real and what's not is just to get your hands dirty and actually try it. And then you can actually see for yourself. And I think that's the best cure for also AI anxiety and probably AI psychosis, right? is just to try it out.
Yeah, so let's talk about how companies that leave the marketplace at the macro level and go more at the micro level. As you, as your experience in talking with companies and mine, I think that I think AI and getting to agentic AI and how it's going to affect a company is on everybody's mind right now. But there's also, I think Gartner has a couple of really great slides on this, but the idea that the maturity of where you are, you can't jump from, to use a driving analogy, you can't jump from the slow lane to the fast lane. It just doesn't, or just jump right into the fast lane. You have to go through the series of learning processes that are there to get to agentic, and you have to sort of cut your teeth, I think, with just general, maybe we start with machine learning and then we go to AI and then we can start to get down toward that. But you can't start, is my experience, and companies I think struggle with a little bit because they want to jump right to the, so to speak, the good stuff or the outcomes or the cutting edge. And it's just very, very challenging to get there, especially in larger organizations where you have change management issues and you have domains and politics and some of those things. So share, if you would, Ryan, what you're seeing with companies' preparedness. They have champagne tastes and beer budgets, so to speak, right? And how do they get into the faster lane? Maybe not all the way to the fast lane, but how do they get on the on ramp all the way and get better?
Absolutely. Well, I think the first thing that we have to do is, I think in all ways, and I don't want to want to overly preach. I think self-awareness is one of the most important qualities of individuals or companies. So, if you're not able to understand where you're at, it's gonna be very difficult to sort of get to the place that you want to go, right? So first, you have to understand, who are we as an organization? What team do we actually have? What experience are we capable of doing? What initiatives do we have running in parallel? And then also, I think, the analogy is always, if you're going to eat an elephant, do it one bite at a time. Don't eat elephants, of course, anybody listening. But if you were, then one bite at a time, right? Small little chunks. And ultimately, I would treat it the same way we did with the serverless side, which is just, the latest abstraction of cloud development. I won't go super deep into it now, but it's part of this overall digital transformation sort of journey where you have your current state today, you have something new that you want to take advantage of, but the distance between where you are and where you want to go, it requires a lot of layers to be built up over time. And I think too often people on high, as I said, 10,000 feet up, they hear a story and they go, hey, you know what? Netflix was able to do it in 3 months. And what we fail to see in that case is they've spent 7 years preparing for that 3 months. If you don't have that background that they have, then you have to really take seriously the foundational layers. And why is that important? Well, imagine you're building a skyscraper and you tried to rush the construction. How much money are you going to lose? And what's the consequence of it if that building falls down, right? If you didn't have a good foundation, now you have to demolition the entire thing. It's like, hey, I already spent all this money on elevators. I already did all this interior decoration. What do you mean we have to tear it down? And it's like, well, you should have started slower and built up incrementally. And I think another piece is the honesty about, do we have the experience in-house to be able to do this really? And yes, we could, but is it the best use of our time? And do we offer the most impact there? And I think oftentimes, like you were saying a second ago about the higher end of the consulting end, when I think about things like, okay, if someone was going to solve my problem and they're going to do it in a way where I know it's going to work, and let's say it's something critical, it's a database optimization, I've got a production application, it's customer facing, there's millions of customers, they're all using this, the database is being overrun, and I could try to figure it out, but what is the blowback if I get that wrong? And I think that risk calculation ends up forcing, me in that case, well, if someone's going to charge me $1,000 an hour, but I know that it's going to work what they do, I'm going to happily pay $1,000 an hour. And I think a lot of executives or procurement or legal or people that are, quote unquote, the spreadsheet leadership, 10,000 feet up view, they hear a number like $1,000 an hour and they say, absolutely not. You're crazy. You're going to waste all this money. And they don't realize that by not bringing that individual in for 10 hours of time, because they've done it 100 times and they know exactly what to do, you reinvent the wheel, you do it slightly wrong, you cause a bunch of downstream ripple effects that end up, in a worst case scenario, causing a data leak. What's the cost of that? $10 million on average. Or you end up just creating a worse customer experience. You cause downtime inside of the application. Now you're showing up on different news channels about how XYZ application has been down for the past 3-4 hours, and hopefully it's not critical. And so in that case, that's how I would look at it. I go, okay, we could do this ourselves. Absolutely. I could pick up a course on this and I could try to spend the weekend learning about it. But how do I really know that it's going to work? And for me, I would reach out to the open market, find the experts in that specific area, bring them in, and I would pay the top dollar for the best people because I firmly believe that paying someone $1,000 an hour for 10 hours is infinitely better than paying someone $50 an hour, or sorry, $50 an hour for hundreds or thousands of hours where I can't really have that confidence that it's been done properly.
I think the companies, especially middle market companies, they need to look at this as an R&D. Almost they're very comfortable with investing in R&D for new product development because maybe it's directly attributable to revenue. But they struggle a little bit, I think, with R&D for internal cost savings. It's just not the natural. So they have to look at building agents and AI as a R&D effort. I think is one way to conceptualize it, and then know that that's going to pay downstream dividends, but it's not necessarily directly attributable to something that's going to happen right now. The second thing I think that I see is it's in the market as well is it's hard to attract talent. I've worked with some really big multinational organizations, and a lot of times they have money to throw at this kind of problem, and the hiring and building a center of excellence and looking at like your Netflix example. Middle market companies aren't really wired that way, number one. And number two, they also have a harder time attracting talent. Some of these bigger brands that I was referring to that I've worked to, and I won't name right here, but they have big brands, big consumer product brands nationally known, and they have a hard time getting people to come be data scientists for them or come in and be a prompt engineer. And these kinds of roles, these folks are wired or maybe more younger skewed, and they're also like they like the gig economy kind of an approach to their career. So they don't want to get tied up with a corporate kind of company. They want to do a project and then find the next interesting thing that they want to do. They're less about like lifelong, the gold watches, they say, and, doing 40, 50 years with a company. And what have you seen, Ryan? I think that's the way I've seen the way the market thinks about it. Let's also use this as a lead in to like how to restructure development teams and engineering teams and data teams. I think is an interesting change and where we are with, having testers versus the whole model, the engineering and model is changing, and the titles and the skills are different. So share with us, I think, a little bit about the people side of it and what you're seeing with how companies are restructuring themselves and training. And again, I believe 100% of what you said. Get good people in, do the look over the shoulder kind of knowledge transfer and training as a part of a project. And then the wonderful thing about consultants is that you can send them home. Say, okay, project's over. And
Exactly.
I've learned from you, I've taken your skill, your experience, and now my people are gonna try it themselves.
Exactly. Yeah. So I guess the first one that I had written down when you were talking was the internal cost savings initiatives. It'd probably be one that you said doesn't get enough
I,
love, and I think that
I
that's
touched I touched a lot of topics there.
you
So
taught. I haven't written down, so I'll go. So internal cost savings is the first one I had, and I just want to touch on and say, imagine we were a Formula One team and we're building an engine, and the only measurement that we have is whether or not we can win that race, right? We can take podium positions. Then every little advancement and optimization inside of the car and the wheels and the tires and the engine, everything, it all impacts the overall of it. But I feel like in modern organizations, especially I'll just say it that way, in organizations today, they don't really see it that way. And so any optimizations, they take time. That's the R&D side of it. And if I'm going to figure out a way to make the front scoop a little bit more aerodynamic, I can't just snap my fingers and show you a result. I have to do experiments. I have to try. to do this, but I know that if it does end up working, there's a downstream effect of it. But I feel like the process of understanding what we have today, what optimizations could have a downstream ripple effect on the business and how to quantify that, I just don't think that's being done really at all. And I think every company should be doing it. Some companies obviously do, but not enough. And what's the impact of it? I'll give you an example. If we have hundreds of software developers that are all working every single day, and we're able to figure out a way to save them 1 minute of time every single day, right? Those numbers are real. They add up over time. They add up over a year. What if it's 5 minutes? What if it's 10 minutes? What if we take an entire pattern and we automate that pattern? What if we look and we deconstruct, and we find out, hey, all the services that we've been releasing, they all look 80% the same. So why don't we go through and build all the supporting layers every time that we release something through our CI/CD pipeline? It all leverages the same static code analysis. Everything's identical. So I think that level of thinking about how you stop repeating yourself many times over across all these different teams, how you build up tooling that can help each individual person work better. That's something that has been extremely relevant pre-AI. And I think now it's just, if anything, it's bubbling it up in front of everyone's eyes, which is, hey, what if we automated part of the drafting process for social media? What if we helped automate part of the process for drafting a video script? And then we can really quantify, okay, well, how long does it take for someone to do a video script? It takes an hour. Okay, great. And I think that's the right way to think about pretty much everything going on. But you want to do it in stages. You don't want to, we have a saying, which is pre-optimization is the root of all evil. And the reason why is if you pre-optimize something that shouldn't exist, you're kind of just spinning in circles for no net benefit. And so the first thing that you want to do, this would be if I was building out an agentic AI system, you want to start very small and you want to do little chunks of work at a time. And this is partially because we come from the perspective now, AI will hallucinate. It will. And if you come from the perspective that it won't, we call that hope-driven development. And hope-driven development is not a good way to do things.
As
And
we like to
so
say, as we like to say in sales, hope is not a strategy.
hope is not a strategy. So first thing that you want to do, I would say grab whatever job function that you're trying to think through. We got to be honest. This goes back to the self-awareness, the reality of where things are at. I'm sure it will get better over time, but where we are right now, we're talking about task level automation with agentic workflows, not entire job functions, which would be a little bit bigger of an umbrella, and not entire jobs, which would be an even bigger umbrella. So go down to the task level. Think about video script generation, right? Think about the process of going through and analyzing an article based on a format or based on rules that you have, just that one piece, and then quantify it. How much time does the human spend working on it? And then try to figure out whether or not this is worthwhile to do. If you go through that process and you identify something that is worthwhile, don't just give it to some random person off the street that says they're an AI engineer or AI expert. Bring in your domain expert that's doing that today, that exact thing that knows what's good and what's bad, what's quality, what works for the company, has an understanding of the existing system today, and then couple them with an AI engineer and AI architect to then help you step through the process iteratively to build out that workflow and stamp it down. And I think that if you give the task of building out an agentic workflow just to the domain expert that's focused on marketing, I think the quality of that workflow is not going to be that great, right? You really want someone that's thinking about how to structure agentic workflows across all different types of tasks, but may not have the direct knowledge of what you are specifically trying to accomplish. And if you try to just write it down in a document and say, here's this one-page document, just build it out to do this, you can probably get pretty close to the right, direction for it. However, you do too many steps too quickly, as we talked about earlier, and you run 5 times faster in the wrong direction. That's just wasted time, rework, and so on. So that's how I would sort of frame, start small, make sure to lean in with the person that's already inside the company. What's the consequence if you get this wrong? And if you get it wrong, and we saw this on the digital transformation side, I was brought into companies and they're like, hey, Ryan's coming in. And they're like, oh, who's Ryan? He's like, well, he's going to be doing X, Y, Z. But the way they communicated it made it sound like he's going to replace your job. And you know what? Immediately we had people leave that had 15 years of experience. One of those guys, he had written almost every single implementation for all of their virtual machines, all of the patching software, all their scripts that were running the entire business. and they pushed him out the door, and then they didn't even fully realize. And I had to, and then they looked at me and they're like, "Hey, now redo what that guy spent 15 years doing." And you're like, "Man, why did you not bring him in as a core person in this entire initiative?" We have to switch that thinking off that this person is the past and we're the future, and we have to say, look, we're trying to enhance and empower the person that already exists that knows how to do these things with some tooling and with some automation, which in its current form today is in the form of agentic workflows.
Yeah, complex projects. A lot of times, having in my background, I worked for SAP in the 90s for a chunk of time, and they're very, very transformative projects. And, we really dug our heels in and made sure that the leadership within the company comes from the top of the organization down, that this is something we're doing and, don't get in the way. Like everybody jump on the bus unless the bus is going to run you over. So you have to think about the politics and the change management because these systems are just systems that help people do their job. Yeah, some people may be eliminated over time, or changed into a different role. But it really, you have to the leadership teams inside the organizations have to be aware of the fact that change scares people. It always has. They know
Yep.
what they know, and they need a paycheck, and they like this company, and they've invested, and companies have to be careful about how they characterize the projects, and then how, and again, putting their full force behind it, but doing it in a way that feels like it's additive to the employee as opposed to, some sort of replacement. I want to
Absolutely.
drill.
I
I'm
just wanted
sorry.
to jump in there. No, so there's a Jevons Paradox is one that I think about a lot, which is if we can do more, we do more. And so if I can streamline my marketing to be able to handle article posts, so after maybe someone on our team publishes an article, automatically triggers an agentic workflow to write out the social media posts. Now our head of marketing, instead of initiating those steps manually each time, now just sees the end result, which is some drafts, modifies those to make sure it adheres to our language, pushes them out. Well, now that head of marketing's freed up. And then what can they do? Well, now they're looking at our SEO of our website. Now they're thinking about how to do more marketing on the podcast side. Now we're starting a new podcast. We're doing more webinars. We're looking at events. We're looking at new partnerships. And I think that's how we have to think about it, is that if we can do more, we always do more. And I think that's a good way to bring that into the conversations with your team, because that's going to reassure them that, hey, look, we're doing this and you're helping us with building these workflows out, not to replace your job, because then you have people drag their feet, you have good people leave. And there's always that saying, which is if you push people out, you make it a toxic work environment. The only people that are left are the ones that had no other option. And you don't want those people at the end of the day, right? So you need the best people possible. And for that, you got to have the right culture.
I love the expression. There's no such thing as good writing. There's just good editing. And I think that's the way we sort of have to look at some of these agents and these tools, is that they will help with the initial writing, and you don't want that job. What you want to do is take it and have good editing against it. So what I want to do is I do want to talk a little bit about like AI, agentic AI is getting a little bit of a bad rap right now. I think in some cases with regards to how much goes into production, which is kind of the problem we've just been discussing, is that since it's not looked at as an R&D effort, it's maybe a political football, or people are scared or worried about their jobs, those kinds of things. What I wanted to though drill into a little bit is where to start. And I've seen customers do it both ways. One way is do it over the top. And that means I have a new chief data officer that's come in. I've got a good customer that this happened at. And what they wanted to do is, we want to get down the path of AI, but we know our data is not good. And as the new chief data officer, she was going to say, listen, I don't want to lose the confidence of the business by doing AI projects that then don't work or don't add value. And then the business lose confidence maybe in the IT organization or AI as a concept. Let's go fix the data, clean the data. But then before that, we have to say, okay, it's a good time to put in new data governance policies, so that when we cleanse the data and then we put it maybe in a new structure, repository, some sort of environment, that it doesn't get corrupted again, and that at least we're running models against data that is good. So there's that approach. And then there's the secondary approach, which says that's boiling the ocean inside my organization, and it's fraught with politics and problems and changes and the definition of a customer and the definition of what a product is. All of those things make it really, really difficult to do that kind of project, and that could take a long time. But we want to show progress right now. So there's a second school of thought that says, and I've seen customers do this as well, is like, and I'll use sales as an example. It's like, let's just start. The sales organization has all sorts of needs around research of custom prospects and customers and best PowerPoint and presentation materials and contracts and that kind of thing. Let's use some of these tools to make the life of the go-to-market people better. And let's see how it works there. Because we know there's lots of benefit, a lot of manual processes. So how have you seen it, and what are your thoughts on the pros and cons of the holistic over the top versus the tactical and show some at least small victories?
The first thing that I would go to is, software just like seems like everything in life is very cyclical. So, we've gone through many phases. I think right now we're in likely a consolidation phase. Before everything got fragmented out, we had different data stores everywhere floating in space. Initially, it was one database, but it's rigid, it's not flexible enough. Now we need to split them out, handle these separately. But then now with the AI side and trying to stitch together all these knowledge bases and all this data, be able to use in a more streamlined way that we can build layers on top of. Now we need to consolidate it back together because it's just too many things cognitively floating out in space. And so I think we're in that consolidation phase. And I kind of want to break into pieces. So what I would say is clear business outcomes is really where everything lives and dies, because ultimately I think that you should talk through, why can't we do this without AI? Which sounds, we're a cloud and AI engineering company. So for me to say, that it's, maybe I don't want the customers, but I would say that. I would say, why can't this be done without AI? And you need to have a really good reason, in my opinion, because what you're opening up to is a lot of risk. And why? Well, it's a probabilistic system. It's sending back what it's trained on. It's sending back what the layers around it have sort of informed it to do, but hallucination risk is still real. And so you're introducing something that can and will hallucinate, and you've got to have a good reason to do it. And that's without considering tool use or searching the open internet or connecting to your internal systems or speaking directly to customers and then saying something that now you're liable for. And we've seen cases in the past where what your AI says to your customers is as if an employee of your business was speaking to them, and they'll hold you accountable in court. And so I would say, if that does meet the case, we have to have this. What would be a good use case where that's true? Just analysis of it, let's say of a document. To write that code where I can go through and analyze or summarize a document through pure just writing JavaScript or Java or C++, whatever else, C#. That's not something that is in our toolkit. That's what the LLMs bring in. That's what the AI side brings in, and that's what it's good for. And so I would say in a lot of cases, we're jumping too quickly to go, we need to do this and this with AI. But sometimes if you step back from it and you ask that question of, can we do this without, you end up realizing 7 or 8 out of 10 of those things can be done. And potentially you've already done it inside of the company without AI. And what do you get when you write something without AI? Consistency, reliability, it works every time, it's efficient, and you don't have to have all the token costs running up. And so then you're isolating to just the area that it adds value. You're not putting in areas that it doesn't. And ultimately you kind of, hinted to this. It's the eat your own dog food approach, which is starting internally is always safer than allowing something to be external facing. So before you think about how to extend your production app that touches customer interactions, I would say do exactly like you said. What about your accounting? What about your marketing? What about your sales? What about your recruiting? What about your internal operations? What about your offsites, your meeting calendars? There's so many areas of a business where you can already build these workflows out where the risk of failure doesn't equal death. And I think that's a really, big note.
I used to work with a gentleman who was a brand. It was in the dot-com boom, and he was he'd done a lot of I think they're called poster box. He did a bunch of commercials for IBM. but he was on our team, and it was all about the online experience. But one of the things he used to say that sticks with me is like every interaction you have, and he was English, so every interaction you have with your customers is either building brand or destroying brand. And so it's that notion of like if you're going to turn this loose to your customers, it affects your brand. So if it's a positive experience, right? Okay. But you got to be careful because those brand experiences are what drive customer loyalty or drive people away from your brand. You guys are very advanced in building agentic AI models and tools and working with customers. So before we leave this topic, any other thoughts on best practices or things that we haven't covered that you think are important? We've covered a lot of things. So
Yeah, absolutely. So, we have talked about a couple key ones, and it sounds, I don't know how it sounds to an audience member, whether or not whether it's insightful or not, but I would say a lot of times you start out with a very complex ideas about what works, what doesn't, and then you sort of distill those down to simple concepts, which is start small, don't overwhelm yourself, go piece by piece. So if there's 10 steps inside of a workflow, go one at a time, confirm the result. If you're speaking to an AI, if you're working with it, or it's a co-pilot sort of situation, just make sure that you're not sending 10 things at once, because all that context blends together and it can end up creating a sort of mixed result where maybe the first thing that you wanted was okay. By the fifth one, it's like, and so go one by one and drill into it, in pieces, and don't move to the next one until that is fully confirmed and working. You can use things called skills. So you can bundle up these sort of workflows into a skill, and that way it's repeatable and reusable by different people on your team. And then they can take that, they can update it. And from there, you may have a skills library inside of the company where different people, maybe there's 5 people on a marketing team, they're all leveraging the same skill, and it's helping them maybe draft a marketing post in a language that represents the company. A lot of work and time has been put into those steps in there, and all they have to do is sort of plug and play with it. And if they see something, they update it, and it's great. Another thing would be, I found a weird interaction where if you try to overly document something as you're going, it feels like the right approach. But if you're working on something that is progressing and changing constantly, and if you think about it, think about what you're building as a sculpture, and you're sort of chipping away at the edges of it, right? And you're building this thing out. Well, if you have it define all the documentation when it's still this rough mold of clay, and it starts saying this is the definitive structure, this is the absolute structure of what it is, as you chip away at those pieces, it's very easy for the documentation that's supposed to tell you what that system does to become out of date. And then downstream, it confuses the AI because it's looking at the documentation to understand what the system does instead of looking at the code itself. And it's counterintuitive, I guess, but I would say I've started to not document the project until later, until it's very much sort of taken shape. And that just ensures that if I have to start over with completely fresh context, that I'm feeding it the source code itself. And we always say that the source of truth is the code. And so I believe that, good coding you can work backwards from, and the documentation in that case is sort of ephemeral. And maybe you need it for the human to be able to understand what it is. But if you have good comments on every single function, you have function names that are human readable and describe what that functionality does, and you have documentation that's right above the so not a separate file, but right inside the code itself, that says the input is an integer, and that integer is for, I don't know, the number of followers, and you have it say the output, and the output is this. Those are small things that we would always recommend to any human developers when we're working, and it's sort of our quality standard. But it becomes very important when now the AI is picking up a little bit more of the coding process, and not often things like that are not built in out of the box, and you sort of have to steer the AI to do it. And so this goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning, which is this is rapidly maturing. Even some of the stuff that I say right now may not be exactly the case in 3 months from now. And if you're working with this stuff, as you mentioned, Kurt, it's experimental. And so we have to treat it that way. We're on the cutting edge because there's a potential benefit there that we can capture. But the people that are rushing in as if it's solved and it's figured out, I think those are the ones where they're seeing their inboxes be deleted. They're seeing gigantic data leaks. They're seeing supply chain attacks. I saw one company, it was a couple 23-year-old kids that started a company, and hey, I respect it. I was a 23-year-old kid that started a company, but I wasn't taking in terabytes worth of production data, and I wasn't, giving an AI system AWS, production access, and then it hallucinates and ends up leaking your stuff out. So I think you have to be very careful, make it isolated, do it in a small way, do it iteratively, bring your people in, your core contributors to make sure that what you're actually doing isn't wasting time. And try not to make people feel small in the entire process, because ultimately, what I was saying earlier about Jevons Paradox, the more you can do, the more you do. And so in that case, if anything, the impact of that individual is now going to grow immensely. And if we look at it that way, we're taking our top performers, we're taking our best people, we're making them even more productive, empowering them with new tools, and then giving them more responsibility ultimately, right? To continue to bring that excellence to other parts of the business and then ultimately help it grow.
There's frameworks, accelerators. There's lots of misnomers, or there's confusion about what an accelerator does and how it factors into a project. I think that Forrester. I've been part of presentations with Forrester, and the empathetic comment that they said is that about the customers. The customers look at these tools and they all sound the same, but they are tools that you bring that customers expect that you would bring, and that would help accelerate the time to solution. So thus, the price of the project should hypothetically be less because you have these accelerators or tools that gets you to the finish line more quickly based on, again, your past experience in building this and reusing it. So you guys have done have some interesting accelerators. Gary, your platform is Gary. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that accelerator and the kind of use cases that it helps with.
Absolutely. As you said it there, the name of it is Gary, and it's a tool it's a cloud optimization tool that helps with security, cost, performance. It can look at best practices. It can look at technical debt. It can tell you where, hey, your infrastructure in all these areas is deprecated, or it can take a lens and it can say, you're trying to understand if your infrastructure on, AWS, Azure, GCP is HIPAA compliant or SOC 2 compliant. And then it'll take a resource by resource view of all the configuration of each one of those, and then build out, very detailed reports. There's an entire multi-agent architecture behind the scenes. Each one's handling things like research, editing, confirmation. There's many different cycles that are happening, and what we call reflection loops as well. And in this whole process, the ultimate output that you get is often, 30 pages worth of information, breaking down all this very low detailed information about, hey, I've got this compute resource and it's using this much amount. I've got this S3 bucket that has open access. I've got these network configurations, or I've got IAM for identity access management users that haven't had their passwords read. And so really we're seeing a lot of value there because, if I take an enterprise level account that has 5, 6 plus different environments for releasing from development all the way to production, and they're having to duplicate all that infrastructure many times over because you have to test what's eventually going to be out in production. And so it's a huge surface area, and we're talking tens of thousands plus resources that are related to compute or storage or databases, networking, identity access management, on and on. Having a team or having an individual go through and look across that entire landscape in all those different areas and then build out a comprehensive report that actually tells you what's really going on, that is a very time intensive, and it's also a static process. You do it once and that's it, right? They finish 3 weeks later or a month later, you've got your report. Maybe it covers most of it. Maybe it missed a couple areas. Maybe it has some stuff that maybe this tool doesn't, right? Just based on that person's experience actually building these things inside of the company. What Gary does is within like an hour, you can end up having a report back that actually broke down 10,000 plus resources across that specific lens. It can draft out the entire report. You can go back and forth with it. And all that really happens to enable this, it has a cross account or it has a read-only access role to the infrastructure. So we don't need to see anything else. We're only looking at the configuration. But just like we talked about with the code being the source of truth, when it comes to your infrastructure that's actually running your applications in production, The source of truth is not your VP of engineering. It's not your CTO. It's not your cloud engineer. It's not your cloud architect. It's the actual infrastructure that's deployed. It's not even the stuff that's written in the code base at that point related to your infrastructure. It's what actually exists inside of the account. And everything else is just kind of noise, right? So if you want signal, you go after the infrastructure itself. So what we're doing for clients, we plug it in, read-only access role. We start running a scan. Usually we do something called an inventory assessment. It'll take an initial look at all the different areas that they have inside their account, from storage to database. It'll just give them kind of a rough idea about where they're currently at, whether that's cost, performance, security, and so on, with some immediate flags if things are critical. And then from there, you can steer it into any different direction that you want. Maybe we were one of the first platforms to actually build this out, but we're not going to be the last. And of course, it's so powerful. Every company is going to want to do this. But then you just have to ask yourself the question, just like everything, right? Like people talk about the SaaS apocalypse, right? But what does SaaS really do? They're taking a bunch of things that you could have done before, and they're packaging them up into a consistent, reliable experience. And there's value in that, because otherwise you'd have to repeat that entire thing yourself. And because they're fully focused on making that a good experience, you end up paying for that service. And so on the Gary front, because we have all these cloud architects and all these cloud engineers, we work with enterprise clients building production systems. The knowledge that we're feeding into it and the iteration that we're doing, it's completely related to the stuff that we do day to day. Our belief is that over time, having that engine, having that platform, is going to lead to a lot of downstream effects. But if you were listening and you're interested in actually trying it, you can just let us know and we'll give you access. We'll run a report for you and you can see it from there.
A couple of different things that is universally or I consistently hear in the marketplace is, first, is that getting out of the data center business and moving to the cloud and these hyperscalers, they thought there was going to be more savings that they were going to be able to generate as a result of getting rid of data centers, and really it's not. Number one, it gives you a lot more flexibility, and the other thing, as a part of that, is that they didn't get savings, but that's okay. They're getting flexibility, and it's about this roughly. It's not that much more expensive, is what I've heard. Although different cases. I also hear that consistently that they can't figure their bills out, and that they have people that light up environments or use certain levels of whatever hyperscaler services that are out there. That some of them are more expensive than others, right? They're using more expensive resources for projects and things. So they don't ever take it down after they're done. And or they don't evaluate whether they're using the right level for the type of performance that they need. And then the bills are like, an inch thick each month, and they can't figure it out. So, and then it's different if they're probably, a lot of the bigger companies want to be a multi-cloud environment. They don't want to have all their eggs with one of the, let's say AWS. They want to have some with GCP, or want to do something with Azure. So then they have the rationalization problem at the end of the month, because let's say they have all three of those, and then they have to look at that in its totality and try to come up with, like, okay, where can we economize, and is the bill right, and what are we doing? I think that helping customers with this evaluation and looking at it is something that, again, a lot of companies, there are some other tools that are out there, but this is really something that I think that companies need, and especially the middle market companies that don't want to throw a lot of resources at this kind of, they don't have a whole cloud optimization group inside of, major bank.
Exactly. Yeah. And the thing that immediately came to my mind when you were talking at the very beginning was, I don't know if maybe the viewers have seen it. I don't know if you've seen it. There's a meme that's going around on X, and it's this monkey being handed an AK-47. They're like, that's a horrible idea. So to your point, the ability to build things in the cloud, you can build anything. And in some ways, it is that AK-47. It's a powerful gun. But if you don't know what you're doing, you can easily shoot yourself in the foot. You can easily cause more damage, cause more cost than what it would have been in a different form. And I think some of the push to move everything to the cloud was also in some ways similar to the FOMO sort of side that we're seeing today. And this is kind of it's a weird point to end the podcast on, but I just want to be the contrarian again and say, not every company should run their own IT. And I know that that's tough and that's a hard thing to hear, but the reality is, what are the core components to be able to build a high performing engineering team? It's not just having the best engineers and architects. You need standards, you need process, you need culture, you need all these best practices and patterns and automation. You need people that are supportive and creating the right environment. You need the right team construction, and you need the right agile systems behind it and supporting layers. And all these things have to be there to be able to produce something of value. And there was a Harvard study that was done about software projects where they said only 35% of software projects actually are successfully delivered. So on time, let's say. And so if that 65% aren't, why is that? And it's because of all these other layers that are required that you have to have dialed in. And then to another point, which is there's a saying, I think it was from Jamie Dimon. Also, Warren Buffett has one similar to this, which is there's never only one cockroach in the kitchen. And so when you see one thing, there's probably more.
Yeah.
And, ultimately that's what we found with Gary is that if you think that you need Gary, you probably really need Gary. I'll just say it that way because the amount of things that actually are there. And then you have another area, which is if the person that's evaluating your own system is the one that built that system, there's a little bit of emotional compromising that's happening, right? So
Sure.
having a third party independent auditor that comes in and runs something like this with no emotional attachment to the actual system itself, looking at purely the source of truth. And yes, the findings will have to be justified by the actual team that built it. I think that's a very constructive process. I think that's super healthy. And I think the only results that we've seen, we had a client recently out of Brazil. We helped them back in late November. We ran through Gary. We found something within a day, and it helped them reduce their bill by 30% for December. And they didn't have a load balancer properly handling the traffic. And that's not something that would have been found through the normal means. And the reason why is Gary can actually run SDK. So it can run SDK read requests against the infrastructure and build out its own code in an isolated sandboxed environment. And then from that, start writing out the findings. And that iteration flow of how it's writing the code to interact with the environment with read-only access and so on, it takes it so much further than what someone would build out. And then the last thing that I would say, another contrarian thing, which hopefully the cloud providers don't hate me for this, is we have to think about incentive structures. And oftentimes people are not incentivized to be the most lean and to allow and to give people the happy path to saving money, right? Because the bottom line is the more dollars that come in for them, the happier they are. And so they're not incentivized necessarily to help you as a customer optimize.
Yeah, they look at if results last year were X, next year they have to do X plus 10%. Anything that you do to optimize that bill and drop the bill just makes the gap to get to that 10% growth all that more difficult to achieve. So they do not have incentive to reduce the bill and optimize their services.
Exactly. So we're for the customer. We'll just say it that way.
We're for the customer. So I think that's a great place to end. Ryan, I appreciate your time. Hopefully people found this informative.
Amazing. Thank you for having me.